Admit the reform was a mistake. Say you were wrong, and all this ends. Every week they asked him the same question. For 9 months, he gave the same answer. No. Every week they beat him for it. His crime was not murder, not theft, not heresy. He wanted his fellow monks to pray more, to embrace greater poverty, and to live the vows they had already promised to God. Avila, Spain, 1567. John has been just ordained a priest. He loves the Carmelite order. For centuries it has produced holy men and women devoted to prayer and contemplation, but over time many communities had gradually become less rigorous. The silence, the poverty, the discipline, the original spirit of the order had softened. John longed for something more. He had already decided to leave the Carmelites altogether, to join the Carthusians, an order renowned for its near-total solitude, silence, prayer, and fasting. Then John met a Carmelite nun. Her name was Teresa of Avila, a mystic renowned for her extraordinary holiness and spiritual wisdom, who would later be declared a doctor of the Church. She told him something no one else had. Don't leave the order, restore it. John could have chosen a hidden life with the Carthusians. Silence, distance, no enemies. Instead, he chose the harder path. Together, they began stripping the Carmelites back down to their original spirit. Poverty, silence, prayer, fasting, nothing left standing between the soul and God. Many welcomed the reform, others heard only accusations. The opposition did not fade, it hardened. Until one night in December of 1577, armed men broke down his door. They dragged John from his bed without warning. There was no trial, no chance to defend himself. They carried him more than 100 kilometers across frozen roads to a Carmelite monastery in Toledo, Spain, and locked him inside a cell barely 6 feet wide and 10 feet long. The only light entered through a slit high above him. He slept on bare boards. His meals were bread, water, and scraps. Once a week the door opened. Not for air, not for a friend. He was led before the community and made the same offer. Admit the reform was a mistake. Say you were wrong. Walk away and this all ends. John said no. They beat him with the lash until his body bore the punishment of his refusal. The next week, the same question. The same answer. The same whip. Week after week, for 9 months. The men doing this were not pagans, not enemies of the church. They were Carmelites, his own brothers, men who had made the same vows to the same God. Most men in that cell would have spent 9 months planning revenge. John did something no one expected. With no paper, no pen, and barely enough light to see his own hands, he began composing poetry. Verses he could not write down, so he simply memorized them, line by line, in the dark. Those verses became the spiritual canticle, one of the greatest works of Christian mysticism ever written. A cell built to break a man became the birthplace of some of Christianity's greatest writings on union with God. Years later, John would give a name to a suffering even deeper than imprisonment. He called it the dark night of the soul. To many people, a season when prayer feels dry, when God seems distant, and every consolation disappears, can feel like a sign that something has gone terribly wrong. John taught the opposite. Sometimes the soul is not being abandoned by God, it is being drawn by Him, freed from its attachments, purified, led beyond feelings into a deeper union with the one it seeks. 9 months in, sick and starving, he knew he would die if he stayed. One night he loosened the fastenings on his door, tied strips of cloth into a rope, and lowered himself out of a window into the dark, over a wall, into streets he didn't recognize, until he found a shelter with nuns who took him in. It was August 15th, the feast of the Assumption, the day the church celebrates Mary carried body and soul into heaven. On the feast day of the woman his entire order was named for, John of the Cross walked out of a grave into the light, a free man. No one would have blamed him for disappearing after that. Instead, he went back to the very work that had cost him 9 months of his life and nearly his body. Not cautiously, not quietly, he kept founding monasteries. He kept forming priests in the same reform that had gotten him flogged. The men who had tried to break him never once touched what he actually believed. Years later, opposition rose again against him. This time from inside his own reform. Men jealous of his influence. He was stripped of his authority and exiled to a remote monastery in Andalusia, where his leg turned septic with fever. He needed care, and was given a choice of where to receive it. One monastery where a friend led the house and he would be treated gently. Another where the prior despised him and conditions were far harder. He chose the harder one. The prior treated him exactly as expected. Locked away, visitors turned back, denied even the food given to the other sick men. One young friar showed him kindness. The prior had the boy reassigned. As he lay dying, John asked that very prior to come to his cell, not to accuse him, to ask his forgiveness for being a burden, for anything he might have done to offend him. The prior broke down at the bedside. For 9 months in Toledo, the only word his brother could get out of him was no. At the end of his life, the last words he chose for another brother were not accusation, but forgiveness. On December 14th, 1591, as the monastery bell rang for matins, John whispered the words of Christ from the cross. "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit," and died. The men who imprisoned him hoped the dark would silence him. Instead, it became the place where some of the church's greatest writings on the soul first took shape. The prior who had made John's final days more painful expected resentment. Instead, he received forgiveness he had never earned. John once wrote, "Where there is no love, put love, and you will find love." It was not merely something he taught. It was how he answered his prison, his enemies, and even his final hours. That is why the priest they tried to silence in a 6-foot cell is remembered today as St. John of the Cross, doctor of the Church and one of Christianity's greatest masters of the soul's journey to God.